Chicago in January was a city that seemed determined to make people feel small. The wind came screaming between the towers, carrying snow through the narrow streets and turning every sidewalk into a river of gray slush. The glass buildings downtown reflected a colorless sky, and the people moving beneath them walked quickly, heads down, coats buttoned to their chins. Daniel Reyes arrived at Whitmore and Vance Media Group at 7:43 on a Monday morning. He was 23 years old. He wore the only black coat he owned, a pair of carefully polished shoes, and a sweater his mother had bought him before he left Ohio. The sweater was slightly too large. His mother had insisted it looked good. "You'll look professional," she told him over the phone. Daniel had smiled. "I'll try." He had not told her that the coat had already begun to lose its lining. He had not told her that his bank account contained barely enough money to survive the month. And he certainly hadn't told her that he was terrified. His mother had been sick for almost a year. Doctor's appointments had become part of their lives. So had medication bottles, hospital bills, and conversations that stopped whenever Daniel walked into the room. She always told him she was fine. Daniel knew she wasn't. That was why he had taken the first job he could find in Chicago. Whitmore and Vance was a famous media company. Its name appeared on magazines, television campaigns, billboards, and websites across the country. Daniel had never dreamed of working. It was beautiful. Marble floors, glass walls, soft lighting, paintings that probably cost more than his mother's house. People walked quickly while speaking into phones. Assistants carried leather folders. Executives emerged from offices with expensive watches and perfect suits. Daniel felt like an intruder. He pushed his cart forward. The first few deliveries went smoothly. Then someone shouted from behind him, "Mailroom." Daniel turned. A man in a navy suit pointed toward a package. "That's mine." Daniel checked the label. "Mr. Harrison?" "Yes." Daniel handed it over. The man barely looked at him. "About time." Daniel nodded. "Sorry." He moved on. Another person stopped him. Then another. By noon, Daniel had learned the unwritten rules. Don't block the hallway. Don't interrupt meetings. Don't enter an office unless invited. Don't touch anything on an executive's desk. Don't use the executive coffee machine. Don't sit in the wrong chair. And above all, don't make anyone important wait. Daniel adapted quickly. He always did. He had grown up learning how to become smaller when necessary. He met Ethan Cole on his third day. Daniel was standing beside the coffee machine in the break room, checking a delivery list. He heard laughter behind him. Who let him in here? Daniel turned. 3 junior associates stood near the windows, and with them was Ethan. Daniel recognized him immediately. His heart stopped. For a second, the room disappeared. Ethan was older than Daniel remembered. Not much, but enough. His hair was shorter, his shoulders broader, his face sharper. Yet the eyes were the same. Daniel knew those eyes. He had seen them in candlelight. He had seen them at 19. He had seen them looking at him just before their lips touched during that storm. Ethan looked at Daniel. There was a pause. Tiny pause. Daniel wondered if Ethan remembered. Then Ethan smiled. Not warmly. Not kindly. A professional smile. Almost amused. "Mailroom?" Daniel's fingers tightened around the clipboard. "Yes." One of the associates laughed. Ethan leaned against the counter. "Careful." Daniel looked at him. "About what?" Ethan pointed toward the coffee machine. "Don't let mailroom boy near the good coffee." The others laughed. Daniel felt something inside him crack. Ethan continued. "He might steal a cup for his little apartment." More laughter. Daniel stared at him. He couldn't understand it. This was the same person who had once fallen asleep with his head on Daniel's shoulder. The same person who had whispered his name in the dark. The same person whose hand had trembled before touching Daniel's face that night. Now he was laughing at him. Daniel lowered his eyes. He placed the envelopes on the counter. "Your mail." Then he turned and walked out. His cheeks burned. He pushed the cart faster than necessary. When he reached the elevator, he pressed the button repeatedly. The doors opened. He stepped inside. Only when the doors closed did he allow himself to breathe. He looked down. His hands were shaking. "Don't," he whispered to himself. He wasn't sure whether he was speaking to his hands or his heart. That night, Daniel called his mother. "How was the first week?" "It's good." "Are people nice?" Daniel looked around his tiny apartment. "Mostly." His mother laughed softly. "That's not an answer." Daniel smiled. "Mom, I know you." He sat on the edge of his bed. "I'll be okay." There was silence on the other end. Then she said, "You're allowed to miss home." "I know." "You're allowed to be tired." "I know." "And you're allowed to tell me when something hurts." Daniel looked toward the window. Snow was falling again. "Nothing hurts." His mother didn't believe him, but she didn't push. "Get some sleep." "Good night, Mom." "Good night, Daniel." He ended the call. Then he sat there for several minutes, thinking about Ethan, thinking about the dorm room, thinking about the storm. He had spent 4 years convincing himself that memory belonged to another life. But seeing Ethan again had brought everything back. The candlelight, the rain, the quiet, the way Ethan had looked at him. Daniel remembered the words Ethan had whispered afterward. "Don't tell anyone." At 19, Daniel had thought the words meant they were protecting something private. Now he wondered if Ethan had meant something else. Maybe he had been ashamed. Maybe he still was. Daniel opened his desk drawer. Inside was a photograph. 2 19-year-old boys standing outside their dorm building. Daniel smiled at the camera. Ethan was looking at Daniel instead. Daniel had never noticed that detail before. He stared at the photograph, then slowly closed the drawer. The humiliations continued. Not every day. That would have been easier. Instead, they came unpredictably. A joke in a hallway. Package thrown onto his cart. Someone snapping their fingers at him. Someone calling him boy. Someone asking him to pick up dry cleaning because he was already going that way. Daniel endured it. He needed the job. More importantly, he had begun studying the people upstairs. He watched how meetings worked, how deals were made, how ideas were presented. He read whatever landed in his hands. A campaign proposal here, a market report there. He started taking notes. At night, he researched the things he didn't understand. Business strategy, branding, corporate finance, advertising psychology. The company believed Daniel was simply delivering mail. They didn't realize he was learning how the entire machine worked. One evening, he was delivering a stack of documents to a conference room when he overheard 2 senior executives discussing a campaign. "It'll never work," one said. Daniel stopped outside. He wasn't supposed to listen, but he did. They argued for 10 minutes. Daniel silently disagreed with both of them. Later that night, he wrote down his own solution. He didn't show anyone. He kept it. That became a habit. Every time he saw a mistake, he studied it. Every time he heard an executive make a decision, he asked himself why. Every time someone underestimated him, Daniel learned something. And slowly, without anyone noticing, the mailroom clerk began preparing for a future nobody could see. By his 2nd year, Daniel had become almost invisible. By his 3rd, people stopped noticing him altogether. That should have hurt. Instead, he discovered something unexpected. Being invisible gave him freedom. Nobody cared what he was reading. Nobody asked what classes he was taking. Nobody wondered why he stayed late. He enrolled in night courses, then online programs. He saved every dollar he could. He sent money home. He called his mother every Sunday. And every Sunday she asked the same question. "When are you coming home?" Daniel always answered, "Soon." He didn't know when, but he believed there would be a day when he could return home and tell her he had made it. He just didn't know what making it would look like. Then, one winter evening, he saw Ethan again. Daniel was carrying a box of documents through the executive floor. Ethan stepped out of a conference room. Their eyes met. For a second, Ethan looked startled. Then his expression changed. Something almost soft appeared in his eyes. Daniel stopped. Neither spoke. Ethan looked as though he wanted to say something. Instead, he simply walked past. Their shoulders nearly touched. Daniel smelled Ethan's cologne. The same scent. Different year. Same ache. Daniel kept walking. But behind him, Ethan stopped. Daniel didn't see it. He didn't see Ethan turn around. Didn't see the regret in his expression. Didn't see him watching Daniel disappear into the elevator. And he didn't know that Ethan had remembered the storm too. Every single time. By the end of Daniel's 3rd year, he had stopped hoping Ethan would change. By the end of his 4th, he stopped expecting an apology. By the end of his 5th, he stopped asking himself whether the kiss had meant anything. He told himself it didn't matter. He told himself he had grown beyond it. He told himself Ethan Cole was simply a man from his past. But the truth was simpler. Daniel still loved him. He hated that truth. So he buried it deeper. He worked. He studied. He saved. He survived. And somewhere inside him, something was quietly becoming stronger. He didn't know it yet. But the boy who sorted letters was disappearing. And the man who would one day own the entire building was beginning to take his place. The acquisition took 4 months. 4 months of lawyers, financial analysts, negotiations, late-night calls, and meetings that stretched long after midnight. Daniel never told anyone on the Whitmore and Vance side about his history with the company. Not Priya. Not the lawyers. Not the board. He didn't want the acquisition to become a revenge story. He wanted it to be a business decision. At least that was what he told himself. But sometimes, when the name Whitmore and Vance appeared on a screen during a meeting, Daniel felt something tighten in his chest. A basement. A cart. A coffee machine. A voice saying mailroom boy, and one particular memory that refused to disappear. A dark dorm room. Thunder against the windows. Ethan's face inches from his. The kiss. Daniel hated that the past could still live so vividly inside him. So he worked harder. He reviewed every financial statement. He studied every department. He examined every executive contract. And when the acquisition finally closed, Daniel sat alone in his office in Seattle. The final documents were spread across his desk. Whitmore and Vance was officially his. He looked at the signature page. Daniel Reyes, Chief Executive Officer, Reyes Media Group. 7 years ago, he had carried mail for the company. Now he owned the company. The irony wasn't lost on him. He leaned back in his chair. For a few seconds, he allowed himself to feel proud. Then his phone rang. Priya. Everything is finalized. Daniel smiled. Good. You'll fly to Chicago tomorrow? Yes. Want me there? Daniel thought about it. Eventually. Priya paused. Daniel. Yes. If you're going back because of someone there. Daniel said nothing. Priya continued. Make sure you don't confuse closure with unfinished business. Daniel stared at the city outside his window. I'm not sure there's a difference. There is. He smiled. You sound like my mother. Your mother sounds wise. Daniel laughed. She is. He ended the call. Then he opened his desk drawer. Inside was the old photograph from college. 2 19-year-old boys. Daniel smiling at the camera. Ethan looking at Daniel. Daniel stared at the picture. Tomorrow, he whispered. He didn't know whether he was talking to Ethan or to the boy he used to be. The next morning, Daniel arrived at the airport before sunrise. He wore a charcoal suit. No tie. His luggage was minimal. He had never been someone who traveled with much. On the flight to Chicago, he tried to work. He couldn't. He looked out the window instead. Clouds stretched beneath him. Somewhere below them was Ohio. His mother was buried there now. She had passed away 3 years earlier. Daniel had been beside her. She had held his hand. Her last words to him had been simple. Don't spend your life proving something to people who never saw you. At the time, Daniel hadn't understood. Now he did. Perhaps buying Whitmore and Vance wasn't about proving anything. Perhaps it was about returning to the place where he had once believed he was nothing and discovering that he no longer needed its approval. The plane descended. Chicago appeared beneath the clouds. Gray. Cold. Familiar. Daniel watched the skyline approach. For 7 years, he had dreamed about coming back. He had imagined anger, triumph, maybe even revenge. But as the wheels touched the runway, he felt something else. Peace. Not complete peace, but enough. The Whitmore and Vance employees received the announcement at 9 a.m. Reyes Media Group completes acquisition of Whitmore and Vance Media Group. Daniel Reyes appointed Chief Executive Officer. No photograph. No personal history. Just his name. At 9:03, someone searched him online. At 9:05, another employee did. By 9:10, the entire 14th floor was talking. Who is he? Where did he come from? He's only 30. 31. How much is Reyes Media worth? Does anyone know what he looks like? Someone finally found a photograph. The office went silent. A woman stared at her screen, then whispered, "No." Her colleague looked over. "What?" She turned the laptop around. The photograph showed Daniel in a dark suit, standing beside the mayor of Seattle at a business conference. Someone at the table recognized him. "That's Daniel." "Daniel who?" "The mailroom." Silence. The woman shook her head. "You're kidding." "I'm not." Within minutes, the story spread. Daniel Reyes, the mailroom clerk, the new CEO. Someone who had spent 7 years in the basement now owned the company. People began remembering things. Jokes. Comments. Orders. Things they had said when they assumed Daniel would never matter. Some employees became nervous. Others were embarrassed. A few began deleting old messages. And Ethan Cole? Ethan was in his office on the 14th floor, completely unaware. He was reviewing a client proposal when his assistant entered. "Mr. Cole?" He looked up. "What is it?" "The announcement." "Which announcement?" "The acquisition." "I know about the acquisition." "No." She swallowed. "The CEO." Ethan frowned. "What about him?" His assistant placed a tablet on the desk. "His name is Daniel Reyes." Ethan stared at the screen. The room seemed to tilt. For several seconds, he didn't move. Then he whispered, "No." His assistant looked confused. "Do you know him?" Ethan didn't answer. He stared at the photograph. There he was. Daniel. Older. More confident. Completely transformed. But unmistakably Daniel. The same eyes. The same quiet expression. Only now, there was something in those eyes Ethan had never seen before. Authority. Ethan stood. "Leave me." His assistant hesitated. "Mr. Cole? Please." She walked out. The door closed. Ethan sat back down. His hands were shaking. He remembered the mailroom, the coffee joke, the holiday party. Daniel standing across the ballroom, the look in his eyes. Ethan covered his face. Oh God! He had spent 7 years telling himself Daniel had moved on. He had convinced himself that Daniel had forgotten. But now the truth was standing on his screen. Daniel hadn't disappeared. He had become someone Ethan couldn't ignore. At 10 a.m., the elevator doors opened. Daniel stepped onto the 14th floor. Conversation stopped. People looked up. Some recognized him immediately. Others didn't. Daniel walked calmly through the hallway. His shoes clicked softly against the marble. He remembered those floors. He remembered pushing a cart through them. He remembered people stepping around him as if he were furniture. Now employees stepped aside because they wanted him to pass. Daniel almost smiled at the irony. He reached the executive corridor. The receptionist stood quickly. "Mr. Reyes." Daniel nodded. "Good morning. Welcome." "Thank you." She looked nervous. "Would you like me to announce you?" Daniel looked toward the glass offices. "No." He knew exactly where he was going. He walked to Ethan's office. The door was open. Ethan was sitting behind his desk. He looked up. Their eyes met. 7 years collapsed into a single second. Ethan stood. Neither spoke. Daniel could hear his own heartbeat. Ethan looked older than Daniel remembered. There were faint lines around his eyes. His confidence seemed thinner, as though life had finally taught him that control could be lost. Daniel stood in the doorway. Ethan's lips parted. "Daniel." The sound of his name nearly broke something inside Daniel. He had imagined this moment so many times. In some versions, he shouted. In others, he smiled. Sometimes he walked away without saying anything. Reality was quieter. Daniel gave a small nod. "Mr. Cole." Ethan flinched. The formality hurt. Daniel saw it. Good, he thought. Let him feel something. "You're the CEO," Ethan said. "I am." "I didn't know." "I know." Ethan looked at him. Nobody knew. That was intentional. Ethan swallowed. "Why?" Daniel stepped into the office. "Because I didn't want anyone treating me differently because of who I used to be." Ethan's eyes lowered. "Who you used to be?" Daniel looked around the office. "The mailroom clerk." Ethan closed his eyes briefly. Daniel continued. "You remember him?" Ethan looked at him again. "I remember everything." The words landed harder than Daniel expected. He had spent years wishing Ethan would say that. Now that he had, Daniel didn't know what to do with it. He moved toward the window. The same view. Lake Michigan. Gray water. Gray sky. The city below. 7 years earlier, he had delivered Ethan's packages and looked at this view from the hallway. Now he stood inside the office. Ethan remained behind him. "You changed," Ethan said. Daniel smiled faintly. "People do." "You look." Ethan stopped. Daniel turned. "What?" "Different." Daniel held his gaze. "I had to become different." Ethan's face tightened. "I know." Daniel studied him. "Do you?" Ethan didn't answer. The silence said enough. The first leadership meeting took place an hour later. Daniel entered the conference room. 22 senior employees sat around the table. Some had known him. Some had forgotten him. Some had never noticed him. Daniel stood at the head of the table. He looked at the faces. Then he spoke. "I know many of you are wondering why Reyes Media acquired this company." Nobody moved. "The answer is simple." He paused. "Because I believe this company can be better." He didn't mention the past. He didn't mention humiliation. He didn't mention Ethan. Instead, he talked about the future. Transparency. Fair promotions. Employee development. Respect for every department. A culture where ideas could come from anywhere. Then he said something that made the room especially quiet. "I don't care what title is on your email signature." He looked around the table. "If you treat another employee as though they're beneath you, you are not helping this company." Nobody spoke. Daniel continued. "Respect is not a benefit reserved for executives." He sat down. "That's where we begin." The meeting ended 40 minutes later. Employees left quietly. Ethan remained seated. Daniel noticed. "Mr. Cole?" Ethan looked up. "Yes." "You can stay." The others left. The door closed. Daniel and Ethan were alone again. Just like the dorm room. Just like the storm. Except they weren't 19 anymore. They were two grown men standing on opposite sides of a history neither could erase. Ethan finally spoke. "I've thought about apologizing to you for 7 years." Daniel's expression didn't change. "Then you should have done it." Ethan lowered his eyes. "I know." "Why didn't you?" "Because I was ashamed." Daniel almost laughed. "You should have been." Ethan accepted the words. "I was." Daniel looked toward the door. "We'll talk about this later." Ethan looked up. "You mean there will be a later?" Daniel paused. "I don't know." Then he walked away. Ethan watched him leave. For the first time in years, he understood what Daniel had once felt. The feeling of watching someone walk away while knowing you had no right to stop them. Chicago was glowing below. He should have felt victorious. Instead, he felt exhausted. His phone buzzed. A message from Priya. "How did it go?" Daniel typed. "I saw him." 3 dots appeared. "And?" Daniel stared at the screen. He finally typed. "It was harder than I expected." He put the phone down. Then looked out at the city. Somewhere in the building he now owned, Ethan Cole was probably still awake. Daniel knew he should let the past remain buried. He knew revenge would be easy. He could destroy Ethan's career with one decision. But Daniel didn't want revenge. Not anymore. What he wanted was something more difficult. The truth. Why had Ethan been cruel? Did he regret it? Had the kiss meant anything? And perhaps most frightening of all, did Daniel still love him? He closed his eyes. The answer came immediately. Yes. 7 years had changed everything. Except that. And Daniel knew then that returning to Whitmore and Vance would not be as simple as buying a company. He had returned to the place where his life had broken. But he had also returned to the one person who had once made him feel more seen than anyone else. Tomorrow he would have to decide what to do with that. For the first 3 days after the acquisition, Daniel kept his distance from Ethan. It wasn't difficult. The company was in chaos. Departments needed restructuring. Contracts had to be reviewed. Employees were anxious about layoffs. Clients wanted reassurance. Investors wanted numbers. Daniel worked from 7 in the morning until well after midnight. He told himself that was why he wasn't thinking about Ethan. But every time he passed the 14th floor corridor, he knew exactly which glass office was behind him. And every night, when the hotel became quiet, he remembered Ethan's voice. "I remember everything." Daniel hated how much those 4 words had stayed with him. On the 4th morning, Priya arrived in Chicago. She walked into Daniel's temporary office carrying 2 coffees. "You're avoiding someone." Daniel looked up. "Good morning to you too." She put a coffee on his desk. "Ethan Cole." Daniel sighed. "I knew hiring you was a mistake. You hired me because I'm difficult. I hired you because you're competent. Both can be true." Daniel took the coffee. Priya sat opposite him. "I've reviewed his record. And he's valuable." Daniel raised an eyebrow. "That's your professional opinion?" "Yes." "And personally?" "I don't know him personally." She paused. "But I've noticed something." "What?" "Since you arrived, he's changed." Daniel looked down at the papers. "How?" "He doesn't dominate meetings anymore." Daniel said nothing. "He gives junior employees credit." Still nothing. "He turned down a promotion last month." Daniel finally looked up. "Why?" "He said he wanted to focus on rebuilding the company culture." Daniel leaned back. That wasn't the Ethan he remembered. Or maybe it was. Maybe Ethan had always been capable of being better. Maybe Daniel had simply never been given the chance to see it. Priya watched him carefully. "Whatever happened between you two, don't make a decision while you're angry." Daniel gave a faint smile. "I'm not angry." Priya stared at him. "Daniel." He sighed. "Fine. I'm angry. Good. Good. Anger is honest." She stood. "Just don't let it become your boss." Daniel watched her leave. Then he looked at the city outside. He knew she was right. But there was another emotion underneath the anger. One he was much more afraid of. Hope. That afternoon, Daniel called Ethan into his office. Ethan arrived 5 minutes early. He stood outside the door. "Come in." Ethan entered. He looked nervous. Daniel had never seen him nervous before. It made him strangely human. Daniel gestured toward the chair. "Sit." Ethan did. Daniel opened a folder. "I've reviewed your client portfolio." Ethan nodded. "You have strong relationships with several major accounts." "Thank you." "You're also one of the few senior partners who understands the company's current problems." Ethan looked surprised. "I don't know if I'd say that." "I would." Silence. Daniel closed the folder. "I'm not firing you." Ethan's shoulders loosened slightly. "But..." Daniel's voice remained firm. "You will report to Priya during the transition." "Understood." "You'll also participate in the restructuring." "Of course." Daniel paused. "And I want you nowhere near my personal life." Ethan looked at him. "I understand." "Do you?" "Yes." "Good." Ethan stood. He reached the door, then stopped. "Daniel." Daniel looked up. "I know I don't deserve to ask this." "Then don't." Ethan nodded. He opened the door. "I just wanted you to know that I'm sorry." Daniel stared at him. Ethan walked out. The door closed. Daniel remained still. He wanted to be angry. Instead, he felt tired. Weeks passed. The company slowly began changing. Some departments were merged. Some positions disappeared. Daniel made sure the layoffs were handled respectfully. He personally reviewed severance packages. He expanded employee training. He created a scholarship fund for entry-level workers who wanted to continue their education. He also visited departments most CEOs ignored, including the mailroom. The first time Daniel walked downstairs, the employees went silent. The young clerk working the morning shift stared at him. "Mr. Reyes?" Daniel smiled. "Daniel is fine." The clerk looked terrified. "Sorry." Daniel laughed softly. "You don't have to apologize." He looked around. The mailroom hadn't changed much. Same shelves. Same carts. Same fluorescent lights. But Daniel was different. He touched the edge of a sorting table. For a moment, he was 23 again. Cold. Tired. Afraid. He remembered how many times he'd stood in that exact room wondering whether his life would ever become something else. Then he heard footsteps behind him. He turned. "Ethan." They stared at each other. Ethan looked around. "I didn't know you were down here." Daniel nodded. "I'm reviewing the department." Ethan hesitated. "I can leave." "No." The young employees glanced between them. Daniel said, "Actually, stay." Ethan nodded. Daniel spent the next hour asking the mailroom staff questions. What worked? What didn't? What did they need? How often did executives disrespect delivery schedules? Were they paid fairly? Did they have enough staff? The answers embarrassed the company. Daniel wrote everything down. Ethan listened. He didn't interrupt. He didn't make jokes. He simply listened. Afterward, Daniel looked at him. "You can go." Ethan nodded. But before leaving, he turned. "Can I ask you something?" Daniel waited. "Do you remember the first time we met here?" Daniel's expression hardened. "Yes." "I do too." "Why are you telling me?" "Because I think I need to remember who I was." Daniel didn't answer. Ethan left. A month after the acquisition, Daniel received an unexpected message. It was from Ethan. Not an email. A handwritten note. Daniel almost threw it away. Then he opened it. There were only a few lines. I know I don't have the right to ask you to forgive me. I know 7 years cannot be repaired with one apology. But I am sorry for every time I made you feel small. You deserved better than the person I was. Ethan. Daniel read it twice, then folded it. He put it inside his desk. He didn't respond. But he didn't throw it away either. That frightened him more than anything. The second month was harder. Daniel began dreaming about the past. Sometimes he was 19 again. Sometimes he was standing in the mailroom. Sometimes he was walking through the Christmas party. And sometimes Ethan was there saying nothing, just looking at him. Daniel would wake before sunrise with his heart racing. One morning, he finally admitted to himself what he had been avoiding. He wasn't just trying to forgive Ethan. He was trying to understand him. And understanding someone was dangerous. Because once you understood why they had hurt you, anger became more complicated. One Friday evening, Daniel stayed late. The building was almost empty. Rain tapped against the windows. He was reviewing contracts when he heard thunder. A deep rumble rolled across the city. Daniel froze. He looked toward the window. The memory returned instantly. The dorm room. The blackout. Candlelight. Ethan. Daniel closed his eyes. Then another sound came. A knock. He opened them. Ethan stood at the door. Sorry. Daniel looked at the clock. Why are you still here? I was working. On what? The mailroom modernization. Daniel stared. The mailroom? Ethan nodded. I volunteered. Why? Ethan hesitated. Because it seemed appropriate. Daniel stood. Appropriate. Ethan stepped inside. I spent years treating that department like it was beneath me. He looked down. I don't want to do that anymore. Daniel crossed his arms. Changing your job title doesn't change what happened. I know. Working in the mailroom doesn't erase it. I know. Then why? Ethan looked at him. Because I need to learn how to respect the things I once thought made me better than other people. Daniel's expression softened despite himself. Ethan continued. And because every time I walk through that basement, I remember you. Daniel's breath caught. Ethan immediately looked away. I'm sorry. Daniel stepped closer. Don't apologize for remembering. Ethan looked back. Then what should I do? Daniel's voice was quiet. Tell me the truth. Ethan swallowed. What truth? About that night. The room became silent. Thunder rolled again. Ethan's eyes filled with something Daniel recognized immediately. Fear. We were 19, Ethan said. I know. I had never felt that way about anyone. Daniel didn't move. I kissed you because I wanted to. Daniel's chest tightened. Not because of the storm? No. Ethan shook his head. The storm just made it impossible to keep pretending. Daniel looked away. Then why did you pretend afterward? Ethan's voice cracked. Because I was scared. Of me. Of myself. Daniel closed his eyes. Ethan continued. I thought if I could convince myself it meant nothing, I could go back to being the person everyone expected me to be. Daniel whispered. And did it work? No. A long silence followed. I thought about you every day. Daniel opened his eyes. Don't say things you can't prove. Ethan stepped closer. I looked for you. When? 2 years after you left. Daniel stared at him. I found Reyes and company. Daniel's heart stopped. You knew. I saw your website. Then why didn't you contact me? Ethan looked ashamed. Because you looked happy. Daniel almost laughed. That is the worst excuse I've ever heard. I know. You could have sent an email. I know. You could have apologized. I know. 7 years, Ethan. I know. Daniel's voice finally broke. You don't get to say you missed me after making me feel like I was nothing. Ethan's eyes filled with tears. I know. Daniel looked away. For years, he had imagined Ethan defending himself, making excuses, blaming the champagne, blaming his youth, blaming his family. Instead, Ethan accepted every accusation. And somehow that made forgiveness more frightening, because Daniel could no longer hate him easily. The rain grew heavier. The lights flickered. Daniel looked toward the window. "Do you remember what you said that night?" Ethan nodded. "Yes." "What did I say?" Ethan's voice became softer. "You said you were afraid." Daniel looked at him. "I don't remember that." "I do." Ethan smiled sadly. "You said, 'What if someone finds out?'" Daniel's heart ached. "I remember." Ethan continued. "I told you it didn't matter." Daniel whispered. "And then you disappeared." "I know." "Not physically." "I know." "You disappeared while standing right in front of me." Ethan's eyes closed. "I've hated myself for that." Daniel looked at him. For a long moment, neither spoke. Then Daniel walked toward the door. Ethan stepped aside. Daniel passed him. But before leaving, he stopped. "Ethan." "Yes." Daniel didn't turn around. "I'm not ready to forgive you. I understand. But—" Daniel paused. "Don't stop trying to become better just because I haven't forgiven you yet." Ethan's voice was barely audible. "I won't." Daniel walked away. He entered the elevator. The doors closed. And for the first time in 7 years, he allowed himself to cry. Not because Ethan had hurt him. Not because of the past. But because, somewhere beneath all the anger, there was still a small piece of the 19-year-old boy who had loved Ethan. The piece Daniel had thought was dead. It wasn't. It had simply been waiting. 2 weeks later, something unexpected happened. Daniel was reviewing employee reports when Priya walked in. "You know Ethan is downstairs again." Daniel looked up. "Again?" "3rd week." "What is he doing?" "Sorting packages." Daniel stared at her. "He doesn't have to." "I know." "Why is he?" Priya shrugged. "Maybe he's finally learned that some work matters even when nobody applauds." Daniel looked down. He smiled despite himself. "Maybe." Priya studied him. "Are you going down there?" Daniel hesitated. "I don't know." She nodded. "You don't have to." Daniel closed the report, then stood. "Actually," he picked up his coat. "I think I do." Outside, rain began falling against the windows, and Daniel realized something terrifying. He wasn't walking toward Ethan because he wanted revenge. He wasn't walking toward him because he wanted an apology. He was walking toward him because, after 7 years of silence, he finally wanted to know what might happen if they stopped running from the truth. The elevator descended slowly. Daniel stood alone inside it, watching the numbers change. 14. 13. 12. He had made this journey hundreds of times when he worked at Whitmore Vance. Back then, he had traveled in the opposite direction. Upstairs with a cart. Downstairs with empty hands. Always moving. Always carrying something for someone else. Now he was going down because, for the first time, he wanted something for himself. The elevator reached the basement. The doors opened. Daniel stepped out. The mailroom was almost empty. Only one person remained. Ethan. He stood beside a sorting table, sleeves rolled to his elbows, separating envelopes into labeled trays. For several seconds, Ethan didn't notice him. Then he looked up. His hands stopped. "Daniel." Daniel walked closer. "I thought you'd gone home." "I was about to." Ethan glanced around. "Do you need something?" Daniel shook his head. "No." He paused. "I came to talk." Ethan slowly placed the envelope in his hand on the table. "Okay." The word sounded almost fragile. Daniel looked around the room. The same shelves. The same fluorescent lights. The same narrow aisles. The same room where he had spent years being treated as invisible. But something was different now. Ethan was standing in it. Not above him. Not laughing. Not surrounded by people. Just Ethan. A man who had finally stopped pretending. Daniel took a breath. "Do you know what I used to think about when I worked here?" Ethan shook his head. "That someday I'd walk through those executive doors and everyone would know my name." Ethan's eyes lowered. "I know." "No." Daniel looked at him. "You don't." Ethan stayed silent. "I didn't dream about being rich. I didn't dream about being powerful. I just wanted to stop feeling like I was less than everyone else." Ethan's jaw tightened. "You were never less. That's not how you treated me." "I know." Daniel nodded. "I know you know." He walked toward the sorting shelves. "Do you remember what you said to me the first time we met here?" Ethan gave a small, painful smile. "The coffee." "Yes. I remember. You thought it was funny." "I did." Daniel looked at him. "Was it?" "No." Ethan shook his head. "It wasn't funny." "Then why did you do it?" Ethan stared at the floor. "Because you frightened me." Daniel blinked. "Me?" "Not you." Ethan took a breath. "What I felt around you." Daniel's expression softened slightly. "You could have just admitted that. I was 19. You were 25 when you started humiliating me." "I know." 7 years older in maturity and still afraid. Ethan gave a sad laugh. "I wish I could say I was better." "You weren't." "No." The honesty was almost painful. Ethan stepped closer. "I was successful. I was confident. Everyone thought I had everything." He looked at Daniel. "But whenever you walked into a room, I remembered the boy I was before I learned how to perform." Daniel swallowed. "And you hated that boy?" "No." Ethan's eyes were wet. "I loved him." Daniel stopped breathing for a second. "And I hated that I loved him." The silence that followed was enormous. Daniel turned away. He had spent years imagining Ethan saying those words. He had imagined them at 20, at 25, 30. He had imagined them in dreams. But hearing them now didn't magically heal anything. It simply made the wound visible. "You hurt me," Daniel said. "I know." "You made me feel ashamed of loving you." "I know." "You made me question whether there was something wrong with me." Ethan's voice broke. "There was never anything wrong with you." Daniel looked at him. "You should have told me that 13 years ago." "I should have." "You should have told me 7 years ago." "I should have." "You should have found me." "I should have." Ethan took another step. "But I didn't." Daniel nodded. "No. I can't change that." "No. But I can change what happens next." Daniel looked into his eyes. "What happens next?" Ethan swallowed. "That depends on you." Daniel almost smiled. "For once, you're letting me decide." "You should have always been the one deciding." That sentence broke something open inside Daniel. Not completely. Not enough to erase 7 years. But enough. He stepped closer. Ethan didn't move. Daniel raised his hand. His fingers touched Ethan's cheek. Ethan closed his eyes. The gesture was gentle, careful. Nothing like the kiss they'd shared as teenagers. There was no storm between them yet. No darkness. No fear. Just two men standing beneath fluorescent lights, finally allowing themselves to be honest. "I still remember you," Daniel whispered. Ethan opened his eyes. "I remember you too. Sometimes I hate that." "I know." "Sometimes I wish I didn't." "I know." Daniel smiled sadly. "But sometimes—" He paused. "Sometimes I think maybe that memory survived for a reason." Ethan's breath caught. "Daniel." Daniel shook his head. "Don't promise me forever." "I won't." Don't tell me you'll spend your life making up for everything. I won't. Then what can you promise? Ethan thought for a moment. Tomorrow. Daniel looked at him. Tomorrow. I can promise tomorrow. He smiled faintly. And the day after that. Daniel's eyes softened. That's enough. Thunder rolled outside. Both men looked toward the small basement windows. Daniel laughed quietly. Of course. Ethan smiled. The universe has terrible timing. Or excellent timing. The lights flickered. Once. Twice. Then went out. Darkness filled the mailroom. For a moment, neither man moved. Daniel could hear Ethan breathing, the same way he had heard him breathing 13 years earlier. In the dorm room, during another storm, Ethan's voice came through the darkness. Daniel. I'm here. I remember this. So do I. I was terrified. Daniel smiled. You were. And you weren't. I was terrified too. You hid it better. Daniel laughed softly. Someone had to. A faint emergency light came on. Ethan's face appeared in the dim red glow. Older. Tired. Real. Daniel looked at him. I don't want to go back to 19. Ethan nodded. Neither do I. We were too scared. Yes. We didn't know how to say what we felt. Not then. Daniel took his hand. But we do now. Ethan's fingers closed around his. Yes. Daniel stepped closer. There was a question in Ethan's eyes. Daniel answered it with a small nod. Their lips met. Slowly. No desperation. No performance. No hiding. It was not a kiss between two frightened boys. It was a kiss between two men who knew exactly what they had lost and understood that forgiveness was not the same thing as forgetting. When they separated, Ethan rested his forehead against Daniel's. Thank you. Daniel smiled. Don't thank me yet. Ethan laughed softly. I won't. The next morning, Daniel didn't announce anything. Neither did Ethan. They understood that whatever happened between them belonged to them before it belonged to the company. There would be no dramatic office romance. No secret affair. No blurred professional boundaries. They were careful. Daniel remained CEO. Ethan remained a senior executive. They worked through Priya during business matters. Outside work, they began slowly learning each other again. Coffee. Walks. Long conversations. Sometimes silence. There were difficult days. Daniel occasionally became angry. Ethan occasionally became afraid. There were moments when the past returned unexpectedly. One evening, Daniel told Ethan, "Sometimes I still hear that Christmas party in my head." Ethan didn't defend himself. I know. I may never completely forget it. I don't want you to. Daniel looked at him. Why? Because forgetting would mean pretending it didn't matter. Ethan reached for his hand. It mattered. Daniel squeezed his fingers. Then we remember. And we do better. Exactly. 1 year after the acquisition, Whitmore and Vance was gone. Not destroyed. Transformed. The company became the Chicago headquarters of Reyes Media Group. Daniel kept the original building, but he changed its culture. The mailroom was renovated. The employees received better equipment. Their salaries were reviewed. Training programs were introduced. And Daniel commissioned a mural for the wall. Contained one simple sentence. Every letter matters. So does everyone who carries it. On the day the mural was unveiled, Daniel stood quietly at the back of the room. Ethan stood beside him. You really put that on the wall? Daniel smiled. Yes. I like it. You should. Ethan looked at him. Why? Because you helped me understand it. Ethan's expression softened. I don't deserve that. Daniel shook his head. This isn't about what you deserve. Then what is it about? What we choose to do with what happened. Ethan nodded. That's better. Ethan had changed too. He became one of the strongest advocates for entry-level employees. He created a mentorship program. He personally trained young staff members. He remembered names. He listened. He apologized when he made mistakes. People began describing him differently, not as the arrogant executive, not as the future of the company, but as someone who cared. Daniel noticed. He never praised Ethan publicly. He didn't need to. Ethan knew. 1 year after Daniel's return, the two stood beside the windows of the 14th floor. Chicago stretched beneath them. The lake was calm. The sky was gray. But there was no storm. Ethan held Daniel's hand. 7 years, he said. Daniel looked at him. 7 years. I used to think that was the whole story. The humiliation? The silence. Daniel nodded. What do you think now? Ethan looked at their joined hands. I think it was the chapter where we lost each other. Daniel smiled. And this one? Ethan looked into his eyes. The chapter where we learned how to stay. Daniel leaned against him. For a while they said nothing. Then Ethan whispered, I never ignored you. Daniel looked up. What? Back then. Ethan smiled sadly. I acted like I did. But I saw you every day. Daniel's eyes softened. I know. I saw you carrying that cart. I know. I saw you studying late. Daniel looked surprised. You knew. Sometimes. Ethan squeezed his hand. I saw you becoming someone extraordinary before you ever believed it yourself. Daniel looked out over the city. Then why didn't you say anything? Ethan smiled. Because I was an idiot. Daniel laughed. A terrible one. The worst. They stood together. No dramatic music. No thunder. No audience. Just two men who had once been young and afraid. Two men who had hurt each other. Two men who had spent years apart. And two men who had finally learned that love could survive mistakes. But only if honesty, accountability, and courage were willing to rebuild what fear had destroyed. Below them, the city continued moving. Cars crossed the streets. Lights appeared in windows. People hurried home. And somewhere deep beneath the building, letters continued arriving. Packages were sorted. Carts moved down familiar hallways. People worked quietly. The same building where Daniel had once been told he didn't belong now carried his name. But Daniel no longer needed the building to prove anything. He had already proven it to himself. He had been the quiet mailroom clerk. He had been humiliated. He had walked away. He had rebuilt his life. He had become a CEO. But none of those things were the greatest victory. The greatest victory was that he had finally stopped believing other people's cruelty defined his worth. And Ethan's greatest redemption wasn't getting Daniel back. It was becoming someone who understood that love was not something to hide, fear, or punish. It was something to protect. Daniel turned toward him. Ready to go? Ethan smiled. Where? Home. The word made Ethan pause. Then he smiled again. Yeah. He reached for Daniel's hand. Together, they walked toward the elevator. This time, neither man was going downstairs. Neither was running away. They were simply going home. And for the first time, the future didn't feel like something they had to be afraid of. It felt like something they were finally allowed to choose.